All right, and welcome to the NodeXL Weekly Weather Report. This is Steve Boland with Next in Nonprofits, joined as always by Marc Smith. Marc, how are you today?
Doing well. Good to be here, Steve.
So for those joining us for the very first time, because we've had a couple little beta tests here, we are going to join you every week to talk a little bit about what we can be learning through the NodeXL tool about conversations happening in the social sphere, the shape of them, the influencers, and we've got a few examples to start with this week. So Marc, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thank you. Our listeners and viewers can join us at NodeXL graphgallery.org. You'll find the NodeXL Graph Gallery there. It's like Flickr, but for network data sets. We have lots of thumbnail images of networks, and these networks often come from social media. They don't have to, but a lot of them are Twitter and Flickr and Facebook and YouTube and those kinds of things. Here on your screen, you should be seeing our front page where a lot of recent network graphs have been uploaded on a variety of topics. Before our recording started, we started browsing through the gallery, and we found a few of potential interest to your listeners. In particular, this one, "Keep It in the Ground," an advocacy hashtag promoted by the Guardian newspaper in Britain. Keep It in the Ground is a network about pressuring the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation into divestiture of their investments in fossil fuels. And so this is an advocacy hashtag, and we can see in its shape that it's a very distinctive pattern, a distinctive social media network. It has at its center the Keep It in the Ground account. We can see that by zooming in here, and we can see that this account is at the hub. That's Leo DiCaprio leading the discussion of Keep It in the Ground. A lot of people retweeting Leo DiCaprio talking about oil drilling in LA, which threatens health. Each of these...
And we should note, Marc, that this is being Oscars, and DiCaprio wins, makes an environmental speech, so has the ability to reach an audience differently from how he might normally on social media. But look at the spin-off impacts is the really interesting thing, I think, about this graph.
Right. So yes, Leo did win the Oscar at long last, and he gave a very powerful speech in which he said that climate change is real. And given the context in which some people would dispute that claim, that was an important statement to make. When we look at Keep It in the Ground, then what we can see is that Leo DiCaprio is now the #1 most important account in that discussion network, and that these other accounts play an important role in that discussion. But Leo, with 14 million followers, has an enormous impact. But notice that we order people not by their number of followers, because somebody with relatively few followers could still be influential here in this discussion at this time. And so in the report, we tell you that this is basically 3 days, 3¼ days of Twitter activity. And in that amount of time, 4,509 people tweeted the word "Keep It in the Ground." And so what we're trying to do with this analysis is reduce your need to actually read all of those tweets in order to answer a set of, I assume, fairly common questions that you might want answered, like, who are the most influential voices in this very large crowd of people? There are 4,000 some people here, 4,509. Could we zoom into just the most important? And of course, we could debate what importance is, but for a social network theorist, this thing we call betweenness centrality is often considered to be a good proxy for importance. These are the people at the center of the graph. And so looking at these people, if you were interested in this topic, you might want to follow these people, and we helpfully put a follow button there. And you might also want to tweet to them a message that they might find interesting. So here, this person, Stand LA, is talking about Hollywood United and Don't Drill LA, and talking about Jerry Brown. And so if you are going to talk to them, you might want to mention those topics in your message to them.
Right.
So,
and really interesting to see that Stand LA is out there with just regular followers, but because this conversation is broader than just people that only follow them, they've got more centrality between them than Mark Ruffalo with a couple million followers and the governor of California. I mean, it's a really interesting way to look at that.
it's true. And, you know, you could dispute that and you could say, fine, go ahead and sort by followers. And in our tool, that's certainly easy enough to do. You've got all of these data columns. And if you wanted to sort by this, you could, but we tend to sort by this because it identifies the people in the center of these conversations. So network theory may have a different way of measuring importance and value. And we think that by creating this weather report, this overview, a map of 3 days of conversation, we can cut to the chase. We can identify the answers to questions that I think an interested observer might have, like, who are the key people? Does the crowd divide into neighborhoods? And you can see here that these boxes represent subgroups or regions, neighborhoods, if you will, that are not necessarily all that connected to each other. In some cases, each of them has its own leader or most central person. We could call them the hub. And these hubs are more visible in the interactive version of the graph, where we can zoom in and identify the person at the middle of one of these discussions. And there's Marc Ruffalo. There's the governor of the state of California, Jerry Brown. And we can scroll around and zoom in to find out who are these people. But these people are essentially broadcasters. They have created an audience in the sense that these people retweet a hub, but they are not yet talking to each other. That is a pattern that looks very different than these hub and spoke patterns. They look like dense meshes or webs. You might see that in some of these other discussions, like here is STEM, for example. That's a discussion that might have a little bit more of a community pattern in it. It might be a little less broadcast. I'll let that load up and we'll take a look. But the important thing, I think, to see in these maps are the ways that a relatively few number of people become the center of the discussion. These people are the mayors, and engaging them is a way of gaining access to these audiences that they've created, rather than always assuming that you are Leo DiCaprio and you can get an enormous audience yourself.
Right. I mean, certainly nobody is minding getting the attention of a Leo, and that's great, but really interesting to see how other folks are spurring conversations and introducing you to people that you might not know, because you're probably not as active as you may be on social media going to be able to get Leo DiCaprio to send your message out. But some of these others that are aligned with your mission, that are out there doing the same kind of work, you can be in contact with that smart tweet kind of feature and start a conversation and see if you can't get introduced to some of those audiences. It's really fascinating.
That's right. And the other features of the report are identifying the other web resources that are associated with the discussion, both overall. So these are the top URLs mentioned in the entire discussion of Keep It in the Ground. But notice that the top URL is not the same in each neighborhood. So G1, G2, G3, each of them has a slightly different, well, has a different set of URLs. And so that suggests that these neighborhoods, these subgroups, all care about Keep It in the Ground, but are paying attention to it in slightly different ways. And this list of top URLs then can be an important guide to where on the web you should be paying attention. Maybe you want to place advertising there or organic content. You may simply want to know that if you're covering this issue for the Houston Press, that The Guardian is also, of course, the sponsor of the issue. But where else is it getting talked about could be important. For that matter, here in the top hashtags report, this tells you where else you might want to focus your attention. These are essentially the addresses of other conversations that you may then want to map. For example, who is the mayor of Don't Drill LA, for example. Each of these topics may be things that you would then, as a social media manager, want to go out and engage in, find the mayors of those topics, and try to get them to amplify your message by essentially repeating some of your URLs and hashtags. That would be one of the really important goals to get out of this material.
Yep. So, Marc, this is great stuff. And we've got a few more tabs that we want to take a look at before we wrap up. So I'm going to ask if we can move to those, because we are chewing up some time and it's really interesting, but there's so many other conversations happening here. Why don't you take us through a couple more?
So here's NP Tech, and we can zoom into, zoom into NP Tech. And when we do that, I want you to notice it's this hub and spoke broadcast pattern again and again. So NP Tech also is a broadcast discussion, but compare it with Keep It in the Ground, where we clearly have one enormously dominant broadcaster who dwarfs all the others, versus something like NP Tech, where we have a kind of balance. There are about a half a dozen heavy hitters here. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe a half a dozen smaller ones. And so there's a little bit more balance in terms of who are the leaders and how big are their audiences. Who are the mayors of NP Tech? So nonprofit technology. We would scroll down here and find out that Dakin Marketing. And who is that person? Sean Dakin, and he's a GMU marketing professor. These people are the people at the center of talking about technology and nonprofits. If you care about that topic, you would certainly want to follow them. And if you were going to talk to them, you might want to use the words that they use to talk to them. You'll know what their topics of interest are.
Yeah, again, really interesting to see that list and to see the follower count versus the impact that some people are having in conversations, where you look at the relatively small numbers compared to, say, Nonprofit Quarterly. But Nonprofit Quarterly tends to be this broadcast thing. They send messages out. There's a lot of people that are following it, and they may be seeing that, but they're not retweeting, responding, re-engaging in conversation the way that other accounts are that are, have fewer immediate followers, but more impact on those followers.
That's right. So our goal, as usual, is to essentially cut to the chase. If you were going to read, in this case, we're looking at, it's about a month of content related to NP Tech. There are 3,000 people, and they tweeted somewhere on the order of 10,000 times. And so the question becomes, did you want to read them all? And if you didn't, what would you have wanted to know if you had? If you actually bit the bullet and said, okay, I'm going to read them all, what will you want to know? We're making an argument. You want to know who the key people are, what they're linking to, what the other hashtags are, what is being talked about, rather than the detail of looking at 10,000 tweets. And so
it's great stuff, but I think that one of the interesting things about what we're looking at here is the ability of almost anybody to jump into this and learn from this tool about something. It doesn't have to be a big multi-thousand conversation. We're just picking a couple of examples where there's a lot of traffic to make a pretty map, but you can either use the NodeXL tool yourself to generate some of these visualizations around important topics for you, or Marc, they can go ask, Connected Action to see if maybe you'd be willing to give them a hand.
Oh yeah, here at connectedaction.net, there is a request button. And if you hit that, it asks you to request a map from us, and we'll give you a form to fill out, and we'll send you a map and post it to the graph gallery. So you just have to fill it out, tell us where you want to get the data from, and we'll mail you one.
Right. So a fantastic place to get started if you're seeing these conversations and going, wow, I can see where that's useful, but I'd love to understand it about my hashtag, a favorite account I'm following, a series of words. It doesn't have to be a specific hashtag, but anything that can be tracked and again, as you pointed out a couple of times here, Mark, not necessarily just Twitter or Facebook. There's lots of other places where conversations are happening, and this tool can also help people see that data too.
That's right. And we should note that about a week and a half from now, we're planning next Friday is the release of the Instagram importer for NodeXL.
Oh, cool.
So maybe in one of our future episodes, we'll be looking at Instagram maps.
Great. Well, I think that's a fantastic tease to kind of close us out for this week. Get ready to talk again next week. So in the meantime, you can find me, Steve Boland, at Next Nonprofits on Twitter or nextnonprofits.com on the web. Mark, where should they best keep in touch with you?
Right. You can look us up at NodeXL on Twitter or at Marc, that's MARC _Smith on Twitter. Also find us at NodeXLGraphGallery.org.
Perfect. Mark, thanks so much for your time. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good to be here. See you next time.